And we will begin. Let me first put our link in the chat. So that's there now, if in case you wanted to review anything, catch up on anything, or sign up for anything, you can always check out our website there. All right, so that's that. And now we are, sorry, now we are ready to begin. All right, so we are about halfway, maybe a little farther than halfway into the 10th chapter. We've been discussing this. It's kind of an interesting bridge between topics right now. So what we saw was that he faced the difficult question. We saw that King Solomon faced probably the most difficult question that anyone ever faces, which is why do things happen to people who don't deserve them? Okay, so that goes either direction. It goes to why would good things happen to bad people? Why would bad things happen to good people, etc. Now, in this discussion, he kind of fell away from the direct question, and he kind of went into just a general question of why is it that sometimes things that people work so hard for are the very things that become their own downfall. Right? He had the case of the person who goes and is knocking down a wall, and the snake comes to bite them, or digs a pit and falls into the pit. Okay, so that was a question that he had, and he ended up kind of getting into this sidetracked into this discussion of is preparation really all that important? Is everything that I do really all that important? Thinking about it now, it kind of makes you wonder. Yeah, it's in a certain sense, it's the same question, meaning, do my actions have logical consequences? Okay, he's wording the question as a big doubt on preparation, the ability to be prepared for anything. But in reality, it's kind of just the sense of, well, if it's all a big divine game, and if you're lucky enough, you get on the good side of things. So then what purpose are there to my actions in general? So in a sense, the question really ends up being, is there all that big of an importance to the things that I do with my life? Right? The work that I put into the things that I do, is it all that important? Do I gain that much by doing the things that I do? This is an important question to ask, both, from obviously from a spiritual perspective, because if you're a spiritual person, then you're hoping to gain something from your spirituality. But even just as a regular, man on the street, so to speak, you'd have to face this question. Everyone would have to face this question at some point: is what purpose does my work have? How effective is the work that I do, the work that I put into my life? Okay, so I would say that's kind of the underlying, the unspoken question that he's really facing, is how effective is my work in that? In which case, if it's ineffective, as he toys with, then you're stuck with a question. So then why am I doing any of the things that I'm doing? Why am I involved in the actions? Why do I take the steps that I take? What purpose is there to all of it anyway? A very good question. It's not it can be a downer of a question, if you will, but at the same time, it's an important question to ask. What point are the actions that I'm doing? And hopefully, seeing as how we're looking at the book as saying that it's something that where he's trying to encourage us, so then hopefully we'll see that he actually gets to a solid answer. But so what we've been seeing the past week was this, he's beginning to take a long, kind of a longish route to get to that answer of the purpose of our actions. And so what does he do? He starts with the ongoing dichotomy between the fool, or any number of different types of fool. We've got a couple brands of fool, but the fool and the wise person. Okay, so obviously, of course, he always wants to push us towards wisdom. So he always has to differentiate between the wise and the fool. Okay, and so what we said last week, the last thing we left off with, was that he said that the nature of the fool, he switches. Let me backtrack for a second. Again, this is all in preparation for this week's verses. Um, but he takes a second and he talks about two different types of fools, right? So his typical word that he usually uses is kasil, right? Chaf samach yud lamed, kasil. That's his general fool. And then every once in a while he uses the word sachal. Now, we wanted to say that the sachal was a very specific type of fool. In fact, it's not a very foolish fool at all. It's actually a relatively a very smart person, but not a wise person. Okay, it's the type of person who is who is cynically irreverent, who knows too much for their own good, and is uninterested in furthering the goals of society. Okay, and so that's the sachal that we've seen a number of times now, recently in the past chapter or two. Okay, so what he said was, let's go into the share screen just so we know we have something to look at, and then we could discuss what we said last week. Okay, here now it's a little easier to listen when you're looking at something. So, so the last verse that we saw last week, verse number 13, said that the sachal begins by drawing a person in with this cynicism. There's a humor to what they say. There's something that entices the person, and they say, "Oh, let me listen to this. They sound really smart." And at the end of it, people are listening to wicked craziness, wicked insanity. Okay, and that's what we saw last week. There's times that a person in search of power, one of these evil people in search of power, will draw people in with tearing down the social norms, and then move into things that nobody thought were correct. Nobody would have agreed to at first, but now suddenly it's there, and it's in the social. It's what do they call it? There's a term for it. The Overton window, right? It's within the Overton window. Meaning that there are certain things that are within the realm of normal. And occasionally things happen in society that move the window over, and suddenly new things that nobody ever considered as being normal or healthy are suddenly within the realm of normal and healthy. So and again, if you were to ask someone back at step one, would you agree to such and such? They'd say, no way, no how. But because of this slow march towards insanity, we have things that should not belong in the realm of normal suddenly showing up in the realm of normal. Okay, so that was verse number 13. That brings us to this week's verse number 14. All right, so again, this is chapter 10, verse number 14. Okay, and he says like this, continuing the same theme. He says, V'ha-sachal, and this sachal, this cynic, yarbed dvarim, he increases words, right? This person layers on lots of words, if you will. Lo yeda ha'adam ma sheyihyeh. The person does not know that which will be. V'asher yihyeh me'acharav, and that which is behind that, or technically that which will be behind them, miyagid lo, who will tell them. Okay. Again, v'hasachal yarbed dvarim. This cynic increases words. Lo yeda ha'adam ma sheyihyeh. The person does not know that which will be. Va'asher yihyeh me'acharav, that which will be behind them, miyagid lo, who will tell them. Okay, so there's a number of things we have to address right here. First of all, I would say that the verse is divided into kind of two parts. There's this sachal yarbed dvarim, the cynic increases words. That's just finishing off the thought from the last verse. We said that what the sachal does, this cynic does, is that they go ahead and overwhelm the listener with lots of words, with things that sound smart, if you will. And when they do that, they draw people into their web. Okay, so I think that's just finishing off that idea that the sachal, again, uses just the volume of words, not volume as in the loudness, but volume as in just the quantity of words to overwhelm the listener. And before they know it, they're agreeing to things that they don't know. My father used to tell me, my father of blessed memory used to say that there was a certain speaker that he loved listening to. I forget who, it's unimportant who it was, but he said this speaker had the ability to, he had the trick, so to speak, of dropping, very obscure words into their debates. So they would be debating with somebody, they just drop obscure words into the debate, and the person debating them never really wanted to, you don't want to stop in the middle of the debate and say, please define that word you just used. And so because of that, they would always end up winning debates because people never wanted to admit that they didn't have never heard that word before, So it's a bit of a gotcha trick, but and he was saying that as my father of blessed memory used to like to point that out as an amazing feature of this speaker. But in a certain sense, it's cheap and it's tricky. It's a little a bit of a steal, if you will. And that's exactly what the Sachal does. They use terminology and phrases that nobody else knows. They add words. I guess you could also look at it as they add words as in they add words to the dictionary. They come up with words. They say things that no one's ever heard of. They use terms that no one ever has ever heard, and suddenly you're agreeing to things that you never realized you would agree to. That's what is it? I think it comes up in Animal Farm with George Orwell. I think he talks about that a little. Maybe it's in some of his other writings or something, that the nature of the totalitarian regime is to change the meaning of words. Noam Chomsky says it too. I heard this recently. Noam Chomsky, the great communist linguist, says that whoever controls language controls the conversation, right? If you're able to manipulate the words, then you control the conversation. So in a sense, I think this is a very insightful 3 words. It's not simply that they say so much, but they actually add words. They control the conversation through throwing ideas and throwing thoughts, and again, that nobody's ever heard of or nobody's ever thought of, and they're able to control the conversation. And so that has 2 outcomes. It has 2 outcomes to the listener, to the person listening. Ha'adam, just because it's here, we've been understanding in general throughout the course of the book that ha'adam refers to humanity as a whole, okay, as opposed to ish, which would be a person. Ha'adam refers to humanity as a whole. And the same, if you kind of think of it like this way: Adam, the first human being, when they were alive, when they were created, they were humanity. That was it. That was all whole humanity right there. Hence the name Adam. So in the sense, Adam in general means humanity as a whole, okay, as opposed to an individual. So humanity, when they are confronted with this cynical, powerful force of linguistic prowess, right? There's 2 outcomes to this relationship, to this intercourse, is that lo yada ha'adam ma she'yeh. First of all, it erases any knowledge of the future. If somebody else is controlling the conversation, is controlling all the ability to conceptualize anything, is all being controlled by somebody else, and they're winning the debate, so to speak, it ruins your ability to see into the future. So people are unable to predict things that are going on now or in the coming days, because as you know, I remember hearing when I was a kid that, and now we're learning that it's true. I remember hearing when I was a kid that at least 25% of the jobs when I'm an adult don't even exist yet. So in other words, 20 years ago, at least 25% of the jobs that exist now didn't even exist. Of course, that's true with computers and technology and the internet and now artificial intelligence and all these things. So there's always a certain sense of you don't know what's going to be in the future. And of course, that's always going to be the case. But this Sachal, this master of linguistics over here, is able to make it that nobody has any sense of what's going to be in the future. Okay, no one knows anything about what's gonna happen in the coming days. So that's problem number one. That's the first thing that the Sachal does when you get stuck in a conversation with them. Then there's a second thing. Va'asher yihyeh me'acharav mi'agid lo. And that which will be behind them, who will tell them? Okay, them, this is a singular, them. Right? And that which is behind a person, who's going to tell the person? Who's going to tell the person what's behind them? So that's interesting, what's behind them. I noticed in the commentaries there's a couple different ways that people take this verse. But the Mitzudah, if I remember correctly, this is from Mitzudah. The Mitzudah says that it eliminates your ability to see anything, to understand anything that's not in your immediate, in the immediate present. So it fills a person with a belief that they do understand what they see in front of them, but it hides other things behind those things. Does that make sense? What's behind a person, they're unable to see, right? So it kind of distracts you with something in front of your face. Meanwhile, there's something else behind its back that it's holding, or behind your own back, actually. It's the listener. Again, sorry. This is the listener. We're talking about the problem is with the listener. The one listening to the Sachal, listening to this cynic, is unable to imagine things that are in existence right now, but are hidden behind them. It's not in their immediate purview, so they're unable to understand it. In a sense, this is really what we refer to, I think nowadays, as misinformation. So it says, look, I'll give you a little bit of information, right? Something behind you, you can turn around and look at. So the Sachal, this cynic, is going to put information in front of you and say, don't turn around. Meaning you could turn around. It's easy for you to get the information otherwise, but it hands it to you over in front of you and says, here, look this way and take this information. So again, I'm kind of understanding this, and again, this is also the Mitzudah takes this approach, that the second problem that we face with when dealing with the cynic, with this powerful cynical leader or master of language, is that the person is able to show you things that are true, but they're only true from a certain perspective. You know, I remember there's a joke about, you know, 3 Talmud scholars who are on a train and they pass by a bunch of cows. And so one of the Talmud scholars says, oh, look, it's a cow. And the other one says, it's a brown cow. And the third one says, it's a brown cow on this side. Right? You don't know anything about the other side, right? So, I mean, that's the brain of a Talmud scholar. You never assume anything you don't know to be for sure. But in the same, in the other sense, didn't connect that much. But anyway, the idea being that it holds information in front of you and avoids letting you know all the other information that's behind your back. Who's going to tell you what's behind your own back? No one, because these people, this person, controls this information. So we end up with 2 issues. Number one is it makes the future very unclear. And number 2 is it misinforms you about the present. Okay? So with those 2 issues, you run into a major problem, right? This is why, you know, as a country, we in America, we believe in a free press, because we want to be able to always have information available for everyone to see, right? Unfortunately, now we've got a period of time where it takes a lot of work to get any information. You know, every news story has got 4 sides to it. I mean, I guess it was always that way to a certain degree, but there's always somebody who's holding something in front of you and saying, look over here, when in reality there's something behind you that you don't see. Okay, so these again are the two powers of the Sachal. I guess maybe three powers of the Sachal. They control the language, they make the future murky, and number 3 is that they make even the present impossible to fully comprehend. Okay, the 3 issues. Okay, so that is verse number 14. Now, with all that, he started with talking about the Kasil, the fool, and then moved on to the Sachal. So it's interesting. I mean, we haven't really touched on this so far, but the fact is that those words share the same letters in a different order. Okay, the kasil and the sachal are similar. They're related, if you will, but they're not actually the same person. So it's going to be interesting. And again, scrolling up in verse number 12, he said, oh yeah, see, there's the wise person, and then there's the kasil. Okay. Then he talked about the sachal, and he's been talking about sachal for 2 verses now. And now in verse number 15, is going to go back to the kasil. So we'll have to figure out what's going on there also. All right. So that's going to be one of our questions approaching verse number 15. Okay. So verse number 15 says like this: Amal hakasilim tiyage'enu. The work of the fool tires them out, tires someone else out. Asher lo yada lelechet el ir, in that which they do not know how to get to the city. Okay. I'm sorry. Got a little something in my throat there. But okay, again, Amal hakasilim tiyage'enu. The work of the fool tires them out. Asher lo yada lelechet el ir. That which they do not know how to get to the city. Okay, to a city, to the city. Okay, so we have a number of things over here. Let me just take out the words first. Amal, have we had amal before? I think we have. But in general, amal means hard work. Okay, meaning toil, if you will, kind of for an old-timey word, to toil. And tiyage'enu, yaga means to be tired. Okay, there are 2 different versions of yaga, of tired. There's yaga and ayef. Yaga is, let me see if I got this right. This is a discussion that comes up a lot of different times. They're very often paired together. Here it's interesting that they're not paired together. If I remember correctly, the commentaries, among them the Vilna Gaon, that's the one I remember seeing, is that yaga is a tiredness from like a weariness, like it's just everything is too much. And ayef means actually worn out from hard work. So it's interesting that the choice of the word here is tiyage'enu as opposed to ta'ayefenu. So almost you would think it should be the other way, that amal kasilim, if we're talking about hard work, it should be it should wear them down. But it's not that, actually. It's interesting that it's the hard work of the kasil does not wear them down, but it wears it's I'm tripping on my words over here. But it's not that the work tires them, it's tiring to deal with. Okay. So in other words, this is one of the reasons why when I translated it, I don't think it's talking about that the hard work of the fool tires the fool out, because if that was the case, it would probably be ta'ayefenu. It's not. It's tiyage'enu. It tires the listener out. Okay. So again, there's this unidentified listener who's listening to, in the last verse, is listening to the sachal, and this verse is hanging out with the kasil. Okay. So again, that's kind of an interesting thing. There's this unnamed third party. Okay. And what's so tiresome? That which they don't know how to get to the city. Okay. Clearly there's an analogy over here. There's some sort of parable that he's not telling us. Okay. So the way I see it is, as I mentioned, there's a relationship between the sachal and the kasil. The sachal, of course, again, being this cynical person with a power of language, almost a dictator, or some sort of leader who's able to control things with their in a certain sense, wisdom. It's almost the ultimate anti-chacham. It's not that they are foolish. Quite the contrary, they're a very smart person, but they're not a chacham. There's a difference. There's an opposite there. And then you've got the kasil. Well, we've said many times now that the kasil is just a fool. Is somebody who's, we also mentioned that the word kasal means to be stuffed up or to be covered in a layer of fat. Right? So the kasil is somebody who's so stuffed up in their ears that nothing else could get in. Okay, they refuse to listen. So what's their relationship? the way I'm perceiving this dynamic here is that the Sachal is somebody who is actually very smart. Again, the Sachal from the last verse, somebody who's actually very smart, very powerful, knows how to control a conversation. The Kasil, if anything, is probably their student. Okay, and this is something that we see very often. Is you can have a student of somebody who's very smart. You know, the smart person, and they're the person who knows how to control the language and use the words and make people confused and overwhelm people in conversation. And then you've got the student. The student is not necessarily as smart as the master. The student is just a robot working for the master, okay, for this sachal. So in that sense, you've got the sechel on top and the kasil on the bottom, okay? The kasil who's the peon for the sachal, okay? So who ends up doing all the hard work? Oh, that would be the kasil. Kasil does all the hard work for the sachal, okay? And then you've got the fact that these hardworking kasilim tire out the listener, not tire out from work again, but to tire out from just being around them. Being in the presence of somebody who is a kasil, who is sold an idea that's not even their own, is very tiresome. I think we can all experience, I think there's, to a certain degree, we've probably all met such a person. Okay, somebody who just parrots other people's ideas, doesn't fully understand them themselves, and just tires you out with using all the right words in all the right places, but they don't actually know what they're talking about. Okay, they see the city, but they can never actually walk there. I mean, if you ask them to ever really express what is it that you're trying to say, what is it? Can you explain to me? Can you verbalize your beliefs in that you're saying? They can't actually get there. They walk in this circular path, almost getting to the city, but they never actually get there. Okay, and so that way, in that sense, the parable is very fitting. It's this sense of a kasil is quite literally a fool. It's somebody who thinks they know what they're talking about, is parroting the ideas that somebody else has told them, but they can't actually verbalize. They can't actually express what it is that they believe, and so they keep on getting close to the city, but they never can actually get there. Okay, in my mind, the kasil is the faux intellectual. Okay, is the person who thinks that they're intellectual, who has been convinced that they are by somebody else, but is not actually there and does not actually have the mental prowess of the sachal. So they're really just the puppet of the sachal. Okay, there's a sachal behind them who's actually controlling things for them. And then on the other hand, you've got the kasil who's just doing what other people have told them is correct. Okay, these are the useful warriors that the sachal uses to fight their battles for them. Okay, they can't actually think for themselves what they actually believe in. They just parrot other people's ideas. There's an interesting thing that we find that the sages over here learn that this verse is referring to Yiftach, also in English that would be Jephthah. Okay, so that's a kind of an obscure story from the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges, in which there was one of the 11 judges that judged the Jewish people was this man Yiftach, who was not a Torah scholar of any sort, was actually the son of a prostitute. He had nothing to him, but he was a great warrior. And he fought battles for the Jewish people against our enemies, probably the Philistines. It's usually what it ends up being. I don't recall off the top of my head, but he fights these battles. And at the end of one of his battles, he sees that there's very little hope. And he cries out to God and he says, God, if you save us from the battle, then the first thing that walks out of my house when I get home, I will bring that as a sacrifice. Okay, they win the battle. He walks home, and as he nears his house, his daughter walks out of the tent or the house or whatever. And so he's stuck with this problem. What do you do with the daughter? And if I remember correctly, again, I didn't actually look up the story before coming, but if I remember correctly, the daughter ends up living as a hermit for the rest of her life. Right? We didn't actually sacrifice the daughter. Thank God. That would be terrible. We don't do that in Judaism. Um, but they that was the whole, and basically it's tacked onto Yiftach that he never fulfilled his promise, right? He didn't do anything about it. And the way the sages look at it is that he's such a fool. He could have gone to Pinchas, who was the Kohen at the time, who was the great wise man, Phineas from the Torah, and he could have gone to him and nullify his vow. We have a process for that in Judaism. He's able to go ask the rabbi to get rid of the vow, and using a certain process, he could have gotten rid of the vow. But he never stooped down. It's not appropriate. I, as the judge of the Jewish people, should not go to some rabbi and get my vow annulled. And so he never did it. So the sages learned that this verse over here is a veiled reference to this story. Never went to the city. Quite literally in that story, he never went to the city to go get the Pinchas to go and annul the vow for him. But it's a very fitting example of this. Somebody who he wasn't a great leader of the Jewish people. He's actually mentioned in the Talmud a number of times as being one of our not so great points of our history, if you will. Even though he saved the Jewish people and did tremendous acts of bravery, but he's not one of our great leaders because he put himself on this pedestal that he wasn't actually. He was this faux. He was this fake facade of a great leader, when in reality he was not even great enough to have the humility to take care of his issues. And so that's kind of another like side thing, is that it takes a certain level of humility to be a great leader. But we can put that to the side right now. That's not the main crux, the main point over here. But again, this verse it seems to be telling us that there's this whole party of Kasilim who think they're really smart and think that they have all the knowledge. But really, you talk to them, you get involved in them when they're working, it'll tire you out. You, the listener, they'll tire out the listener because they can never get to their point. They circle around and circle around and circle around, but they never actually get to the point. Okay? And that leads us to verse number 16. Verse number 16. We've got a few more minutes. We might come back to this in our next session because it's connected to verse number 17, but we don't have time for both. So verse number 16 says, it's going to be a contrast between verse number 16 and verse number 17. Verse number 16 says, Ilach Eretz, woe to you, a land, Shemalkech Na'ar, that your king is a fool or a child. Okay? Na'ar can mean, let's go with the actual meaning. It means a child. Okay? Woe to the land that your king is a child, or is a young adult, if anything. V'sarayach ba'boker yochelu, and your ministers eat in the morning. Okay? Woe to the land whose king is a child, a lad. V'sarayach ba'boker yochelu, and the ministers eat in the morning. Okay? Just because we have to see the next verse to get the sense, the next verse is going to be the contrast. Ashreich Eretz, praiseworthy is a land, Shemal Kech ben Chorim, whose king is a powerful king. V'sarayach be'isiu chelu, and the ministers eat at the proper time. Bigvura, with strength. V'lo vashasi, and not with drink. Okay, so we're going to have this contrast. We don't have time for both verses right now, but we're going to touch on this verse and we'll come back to it in the next session. Just this word na'ar does, as I said, it means a child or a young man. Okay, a nar is a young man. It's interesting because in Yiddish, we've taken the word nar to mean a fool or just childish or kid. So when we say something is foolish, you say it's a narishkeit. It's something that a kid would play with, yeah. So that's narish. Yeah, he's narish, or they would say in Yiddish. So I think, if anything, it probably comes from here or a similar sense that na'ar, woe to the land whose king is a child. In the context of the verses over here, I think it makes a lot of sense. If we're talking about a place, we're talking about a person who is a fake intellectual. They put on this facade that they know what they're talking about. Well, where do you find that more than anywhere else? Okay, you find that by young people. Now, it's not a child in the sense of a yeled, which would be a little kid. It's a slightly grown person. Okay, not only that, it's also a king, a very privileged person. So that's almost like a kiss of death right there. If you have youth and privilege, you end up with people who think they know what they're talking about and actually have no idea what they're talking about. I think that's a pretty safe estimate. Where do you find the most extreme? I mean, politically on both sides of the spectrum, where do you find the most extreme individuals? Oh, usually on college campuses, right? That's where you're going to find it. People who are privileged, they're kings, right? They're connected with power and money, but they're also just a child. They don't have the experience of hard work, of getting through things, of facing adversity, anything like that. That's where you find lofty ideals and nothing to actually speak for. You have somebody who always gets close to the city but never actually gets there because they're just parroting things that somebody else has told them. They're just parroting ideas that they've heard from somebody else. They're being manipulated from some puppet master above them. Okay, so that's probably the most common place where you're going to find this experience, this specific type of person who is both who looks intellectual but actually doesn't know what they're talking about. Now, I'm a little scared to say this because here I am. I'm not so old myself, and so I could be doing the same exact problem, the same exact thing we're talking about over here. But I think this is at least part one of this verse is kind of telling this idea that you want to know where to find this. You're going to find this by a place where the kings are young, okay, where the privileged are young. That's where you're going to very, very easily find your people who are your faux intellectuals. They're faking it. They're parroting what other people are telling them. I don't want to go too far. I'm going to stop actually here with the verse. We'll come back to it next time we're together and we'll discuss. We'll recap this and we'll get to the end of the verse about eating breakfast. not literally eating breakfast, but eating in the morning and what it takes for a country to have people who eat in the morning. We'll get that. It's obviously a parable. Nothing wrong with eating breakfast. In fact, the sages are big proponents of breakfast. They say it's a wonderful thing to eat breakfast. I think a nutritionist would agree also. You power yourself for the rest of the day. Anyway, I'm only throwing that in there so you don't walk away saying, "Oh, well, got to skip breakfast now." Kohelet said, right? So anyway, we'll come back to this verse in the next session, and let's go back to the regular screen here. Thank you for joining us. I hope the mic was a little better this time. Okay, good.